Welcome to the Mets Pod. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and special guest, good friend of the show, Steve Gelbs. As the Mets, we have some breaking news. Per Will Salmon of The Athletic, who was all over it first, have signed Bo Bichette to a 3-year, $126 million deal. Gelbs, this is about as fast of a pivot as I've ever seen right after the evening of Kyle Tucker choosing the Dodgers over the Mets and the Blue Jays. I don't think a lot of Mets fans saw this one coming. How did it come together so quickly?
Yeah, it's funny. When they lost out on Kyle Tucker last night, I kind of mused about this on the air that I wondered if they would make a pivot into Bo Bichette. It really did not seem like there was much, if any, conversation or traction about Cody Bellinger. And, Bo Bichette was just hanging out there. And I wondered if they would make some sort of a pivot to rethink third base. And that's exactly what they did. And, for me, knowing Steve Cohen the way that I do, this guy is as competitive as it gets, wants to win as badly as anyone. And he went all in for Kyle Tucker and got beaten again, like everybody else in baseball, by the Dodgers, who just came over the top with an even more ridiculous and ludicrous contract. And it just feels to me like Steve Cohen was not going to miss out on another one of the big free agents. And as soon as they lost out on Tucker, he just said, you know what? All right, let's pivot. We're going to Bo. And this time I'm not missing.
Steve, how do you think Bo Bichette fits on the roster? Word out there now is that the plan is to play him at third base. The Mets obviously had Brett Baty as the incumbent at third base. I know it's obviously a significant move, but how do you see Bo really just fitting into this Mets roster in 2026?
Yeah, in some respects, I think it's a better fit than Kyle Tucker even. This is a guy in Bo Bichette who, yeah, he's slated to probably go out and play third base. But that means that Brett Baty is someone that can now start to move around the diamond even more. He showed that he could do that with his switch to second base over the last year plus. And the Mets view him as someone who is athletic enough now to take on even more responsibility, to look at first base, to look at left field. I think in some respects, he kind of becomes a replacement for Jeff McNeil as that super utility guy. And, I just think that when it comes to Bichette himself, yeah, the defense will have to see how he picks up third base. But as a shortstop, you would expect it's something he can do. He's a right-handed bat, which the Mets needed. He is a guy who comes through in the clutch every single time, every single year throughout his career. I was looking at these numbers. He's hitting 330 over the course of his career with an OPS over 900 with runners in scoring position. This is a team that last year desperately lacked the clutch hit, the clutch gene, and this guy has it. So for me, not a long-term commitment, allows you to move Brett Baty around, allows you some more possibilities at first base with other guys that are trying it out for the first time in Polanco and Vientos. And I think it's a really good fit for this team.
So, Gelbs, you brought up Brett Baty, who it feels like a lot of people naturally just kind of assume is now going to be traded from this roster. But I like that you brought up the Mets' belief in his position versatility, the fact that they are a little bit of an older infield where you'd like to have more depth on this team. So, from what it sounds like from your end, the Mets still believe in Baty and his fit on this roster.
Oh, yeah. I would be surprised if Brett Baty was moved, unless it was for some
Sure.
major player, right? But the Mets really like Brett Baty. They thought his second half last year was the breakout that had long been expected with the type of skill set and the underlying numbers that he had. They love his attitude about switching positions. And I actually remember talking to Baty a few years ago about the situation when the Mets signed Carlos Correa and then didn't, and how that might have affected him mentally, that they were looking for his replacement. And he said that immediately when he heard the news, he was excited about the possibility of trying out left field. He was gung ho about it. So this is somebody that he really genuinely does have the attitude of, I want to do whatever I can to get in the lineup and to help my team. And I actually think, knowing Brett the way that I do, he's going to be really excited about the ability to move around the diamond too. So the Mets really like the player. They love the offensive profile and what started to come last year. And they also think that he is someone that athletically is more gifted than people give him credit for, and can become a really versatile piece for this team.
Steve, I think it even applies to their pursuit of Kyle Tucker, but now with Bo Bichette in the fold and having already acquired Marcus Simeon and Jorge Polanco, do you think that David Stearns had a bit of a plan coming into this winter that he wanted guys that put the bat on the ball, guys that are not huge strikeout type of hitters? Like, do you think that just maybe just the perfect storm of how everything went in 2025 when you mentioned runners and scoring position numbers, I was like, oh boy, that was the Mets bugaboo in 2025. Do you think that was a big focus in Stearns as he was trying to build out the 2026 offense?
I do. I also think when people question why the Mets would go all in on a Kyle Tucker, but not extend the same type of forceful attempt to re-sign Pete Alonso, that's a major factor. Pete is an incredible hitter. Don't get me wrong, an incredible power bat. But Kyle Tucker controls the zone about as well as anybody in baseball. He's right up there with your Juan Soto types. And so I do think that type of profile is more appealing to David Stearns. And then I also think, when you talk about a plan, the one thing that I think people misunderstand is that David Stearns and the front office sit there and they say, okay, we are going to let Pete walk and trade Nimmo and McNeil and, maybe not go the extra mile to sign Diaz, because then we're going to go bing, bang, boom. We know exactly what's coming next. That's not how it goes. That's not how they operate. I think they look at the landscape and say there are a number of different avenues we feel comfortable with. And now we're going to wait to see what comes back to us. And I think Kyle Tucker's a perfect example. It's not like we heard the Mets pursuing Kyle Tucker for most of the offseason. What happened is all of a sudden he became open to a short-term deal. And once that fell into place for them, then they were comfortable going after Tucker. And so I think with Bichette, it's something similar where, you look at how things have started to change in Major League Baseball over the years, over the recent past. All of a sudden, these mega deals in terms of length are giving way at times to these short-term deals with huge AAV, which in a lot of respects, if you're a player who's confident in your own ability and you just think long-term, hey, I'm going to get this money up front and then I'm going to cash in again and again and again. And ultimately it's going to pay out bigger in the end. And so I just think that's kind of how it's gone, that once the dominoes started to fall in that direction, all of a sudden you pivot to Bo Bichette, say, hey, we'll sign you up for 3 years and we're going to give you over $40 million annually and let's ride.
Steve, Mets fans as well as literally anybody on this planet, rightfully so. They'll celebrate the Bichette signing for 5 minutes, but then the question's going to turn to, what about the pitching? What's next? Probably still the outfield, probably still the pitching. Yeah. And, you mentioned how they've kind of waited out this market. Framber Valdez is still out there, maybe to the surprise of some, viewed as obviously one of the top pitchers entering the market this offseason. We still hear names rumored in trades. Do you think Stearns has more of a comfort with this rotation than a lot of people because of all the young talent they have? Or do you think this is, once again, the Mets have preferred to wait it out and they will potentially strike before spring training begins?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes to both of those statements. I know for a fact that one of the Mets' top priorities from day one this offseason was to find a starting pitcher who could comfortably start a playoff game. That doesn't necessarily mean an ace. It just means a 1 through 3, really. And as the offseason has gone on, I think they are still very much in favor of that, but they are not going to overextend in terms of years for a starting pitcher. And, you kind of thought when Cease signed that contract that might set the market and might take the Mets out of play for signing a guy like that. It hasn't necessarily fallen that way, but at the same time, you look at what Ranger Suarez got, and I don't know that Valdez is going to expect less in terms of years and length. So is it possible that the Mets are in on Valdez and try and extend a similar short-term contract, high AAV? I think it is possible. I also think it's possible that the Mets say, you know what? We had a lot of guys last year that kind of underperformed what we expected. There was some reason why. There were some injury issues that certain guys never kind of got that full ramp up. We feel really good, and I know they feel really good about the young pitching. They think it's a special group of young pitchers, kind of similar to what we saw, going into that 2015 season. But it's a risk. You know what I mean? Like I think they are comfortable. It's not their preference, but they're also not going to overextend. So again, I don't know if that's clear, but the answer is kind of yes to all the above. They want a starting pitcher who can start a playoff game for them. I don't know if anybody is going to come into the Goldilocks zone of making that happen.
So you mentioned obviously the starting pitching and how they're being open-minded there. A place where they probably can't be open-minded is they still need an outfielder, because where we stand today, the Mets starting outfield would be Jared Young in left field, Tyrone Taylor in center field, and Juan Soto in right field. What do you think their plan is for adding another outfielder, and how serious should we take Carson Bench being the opening day center fielder or left fielder, depending on what they actually acquire?
Very seriously. Very seriously. They are going to give Carson Bench every opportunity to make this roster out of camp. They're not going to push him, but they are so high on this kid and think he can be really special and really impactful somewhat early on. I think they will add another outfielder at some point. It will not be the splash. I assume it won't be the splash. Who knows if Steve Cohen says, you know what, what the Dodgers are doing, forget it. I'm just going after everybody and everything. But my assumption is that it will not be a big splash, maybe a marginal upgrade in the outfield. But I would not be surprised if they are somewhat comfortable going into spring training and saying, we like Tyrone Taylor's defense. They love his defensive profile as a placeholder, at least until Carson Bench is ready. And maybe Brett Baty is your opening day left fielder. I'm not saying that is definitely the plan. I do think they are going to add to that group, but I don't think it's going to be anything major in terms of an upgrade. I think the plan will be to have runway for Carson Bench to make this team and make an impact early on. And then as the season goes on, other young players as well, whether it be a Jet Williams who still needs to improve defensively in the outfield, even a guy like Ryan Clifford, who they got comfortable with, AJ Ewing, like these young players are coming in the outfield and they don't want to do too much to block them.
Last one for you, Gelbs. I think there's a interesting element to this as well, as we just read by Bob Nightingale tweeting. The Phillies had agreed to Bichette's request for a 7-year, $200 million deal last night and believed they would sign him until the Mets swooped in. Is there a little nice sideswipe division rival aspect to this? I feel like the Mets had to make a move either way, but it feels like an extra sweetener here to take one away from one of your rivals.
Yeah, it's not just sweetener, almost a necessity. If you want to compete in the NL East, like that, the way I was looking at it last night, and I was actually texting some people this morning about it. When I woke up this morning, I texted a few people and I just said, they have to sign Bichette. They have to sign Bo Bichette. Because if they didn't, he was going to the Phillies. And the Mets, forget about chasing the Dodgers. The Mets have to catch the Phillies first. And so
make the playoffs.
right. So I think that absolutely, when you look at the calculus, factors in. It's not just upgrading your own roster, but de facto downgrading your biggest rival for the NL East crown. So yeah, I don't think it's like a minor thing. I think this is a major part of it. And kudos to the Mets for getting it done.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really great insight as always. You are a great friend to the show, and credit to you. I noticed that little selfie video last night, asked a question, do the Mets want to get creative here and think about a guy like Bo Bichette? Well, we got our answer this morning as the Mets make their biggest move of the offseason so far.
Yeah, just came to me out of nowhere. I nothing backing that up.
Just a nice little idea. Steve, thanks, man. All right, Joe. So, full transparency here. You and I recorded about 90% of a podcast, and then the Mets signed Bo Bichette. So now here we are doing another podcast, which when it's for a great reason like this, it's exciting. But I thought Gelbs had a lot of interesting, not only takes there, but actual insight that kind of went the other way from the consensus narrative. I think a lot of people's reaction to this was, well, Brett Baty's being traded. And I think the mentioned from Gelbs is the Mets have big plans and bigger belief in Brett Baty than anyone realizes right now.
Connor, what an adventurous last 16 hours or thereabouts.
Highs and lows.
Yeah, that's the baseball offseason. Kyle Tucker signs with the Dodgers. The sky is falling. I go to sleep and think, what are the Mets possibly going to do? I wake up, still wonder, what are the Mets actually going to do? We get on, we do a podcast to start talking about what could the Mets do, and smack dab, bang, Bo Bichette is a Met, and just a significant move. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of perception that this was like a panic reactionary move. I don't necessarily think that was the case. I think Bo was probably someone on the Mets list that they would consider depending on how contracts worked out. And it worked out that he was willing to sign for the term that the Mets want. And that's what it comes down to with David Stearns, with the Mets. It's a similar approach that the Dodgers take, which is we want short term, we want high AAV, and we could throw an opt-out to whatever's necessary. The Dodgers might be a little better than the Mets at it, but this is a step in the direction of the Mets operating in that way. And now the residual effect for somebody like Brett Baty, if he's going to be utilized almost in a super utility role a la Jeff McNeil, like, hey, Brett, send him a first baseman because I want him learning first base. I think that's an unclear position at this point. Marcus Semien is a second baseman that is 35, 36 years old. He routinely plays his games, but there could be opportunity where you give him some time off of his feet or something does happen, and Baty is comfortable at second base. So, look, you want to build the best 26-man roster you can. I think there's just very often this perception of, all right, you got a third baseman, so the third baseman that you have needs to be traded. No, depth is really important to get through the marathon of 162.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a couple things to unpack here. One, for all of the criticism that Stearns and Cohen have taken for months now, you have to tip your cap to the pivot. I don't think that they got turned down by Tucker and just called Bo Bichette or his representation for the first time. Like you said, Joe, this is obviously something maybe they had planned for the potential of, especially when Tucker was taking as long as he was to make his decision. I mean, to pivot within 12 hours, it would be. Contracts are, when you have Steve Cohen's money, they can be easier to get done than other situations, but they're not that easy to get done. So you credit to them for the pivot. I really like Gelbs' point about, because this is something the Mets were just dreadful in last year, runners in scoring position. Bichette hit 381 with runners in scoring position last year. He's a right-handed hitter. He fits the lineup. And the fact that they needed to make a move for the offense, and they made one that is a big shot in the arm. But this doesn't hurt the Mets in the long term at all, Joe. If anything, it's shocking. Yes, the AAV is what it is, and you could see why Bichette took that deal instead of the 7-year offer from the Phillies. But, I mean, the reality is this just continues to give them the flexibility that they desire for a player that is 28 years old. I mean, he'll play his age 28 season. These are the kind of free agents that we know David Stearns likes to kind of open up the checkbook for, as we saw, or Steve Cohen as well, because the Juan Soto pursuit last year. But I think next on the list has to be the pitching. And as much as, and we heard Gelbs break this down, they love the young starters. We're excited about the young starters. Having a frontline guy, and there's a wide range of outcomes of who that ultimately is, I think raises the floor of the rotation, Joe, that is really, really vital right now. Because the young guys give you a ceiling, but we know the high variance of young pitchers. This Mets rotation currently does not have a floor.
I can talk you into why the Mets rotation as currently constructed could be really, really good. Like,
absolutely.
Kodai Senga's first couple months of 2025, Sean Manaea's 2024, Clay Holmes had a really strong first year as a starter. David Pearson rightfully made the All-Star team. Nolan McLean looks like one of the best young pitchers in the sport. You have guys like Jonah Tong and Brandon Sproat, and even if you want to go to the next level with Christian Scott, and then even the next level with Jonathan Santucci and Jack Wenninger and those guys, like, the Mets are building a factory of sorts of pitching. But to your point, they badly, sorely need reliability and floor. Do I think they're now going to pivot to Framber Valdez? I mean, I don't think so. But kind of to Steve's point, they could if they really want to. Like, they can afford to do it. It's just a matter of, do they want to do 2 qualifying offer free agents and everything that comes into that. But they need to find a way to get reliable innings for somebody that could start a playoff game. And even if the Mets feel okay about their situation now, whether it is a pursuit of Valdez, or do you take a step down a little in free agency? Like, I don't want to say, do they go for Chris Bassett, but like, Chris Bassett is still a pretty good pitcher, even though he's older in age. Do they go to the trade market? And Freddie Peralta is a name that we know David Stearns has history with, and they seem like a natural fit as trading partners, with Milwaukee reportedly seeking major league ready young starting pitching. Can you trade Brandon Sproat and something, as an example, to get Freddie Peralta? And if you do that, you now added a frontline guy that you can rely on 4 innings, that can start playoff games and will raise the floor of your team. And there's other, potential trade candidates as well. So I sincerely hope, and I would think, the Mets are not done adding for starting pitching. And when I say not done adding, I mean adding because they haven't added anything.
You got to start.
Yeah, you have to start before you
Finish.
stop. Yeah, but I think there is probably going to be a starting pitcher coming in, and now the intrigue is almost even higher as to who that is going to be.
All right, Joe, let's go down on the farm quickly, and then we'll get back to some of the mailbag questions as well here, because the Mets have been pretty busy acquiring all levels of talent this week. It's official. They signed one of the top international free agents on the market, actually kind of swiped this player from the Yankees, who once upon a time thought they had him, in Wandy Asigan. An exciting young talent. They had to trade Franklin Gomez, a pitching prospect, a lefty pitching prospect in their system, to the Guardians to acquire more IFA bonus money, of course, to be able to sign their entire class, Joe. But a Seagan official, and this feels just as big as when they got Elian Pena a year ago.
Connor, everyone was bored on Thursday, like nothing's going on, and I'm tweeting about, oh, Mets finally closed the deal. Wandy Asigan officially put pen to paper for $3.9 million. And this is just a great, again, opportunistic move by the Mets. When Wandy Asigan breaks his agreement with the Yankees, about a month ago, because of some, weird things going on the Yankee side of the house, and opened up his free agency, it's a credit to the Mets that they were able to jump in and be aggressive and reach an agreement with who MLB Pipeline calls as the second best international free agent in the class. I think Baseball America had him 3rd or 4th. So wherever you want to rank them, the Mets made an aggressive push, and they frankly did what they had to do from the aspect of their international signing bonus pool, where they didn't expect to sign Wandy Asigan, and they didn't want to break agreements with really any of their other players that they had. So this trade of Franklin Gomez, who was a guy that was on probably like the just missed of my top 30 list, maybe 32, 33 is where he would have ranked. It's a decent price to pay, but big picture, you do that to keep the relationships that are important in international free agency, and you honor the agreements that you made with all these players.
You're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, let's get into a couple mailbag questions here before we close out today's episode. The first one from Ben Yole, who asked, what do you think about the inevitable Lars Nootbaar, Austin Hayes platoon in left field? I'll hang up and listen. So even with the acquisition of Bo Bichette, the outfield is still up in the air, Joe, and Steve kind of pointed to, like, maybe there is a lower cost kind of move that they could still make. This would fit that bill. Nootbaar would need to be traded for. Hayes is a free agent that matches left-handed pitching specifically.
I like this a lot more now that the Mets have Bo Bichette in the fold. When the Mets didn't have Bo Bichette and they didn't have added really anything at the outfield or third base, this felt light. Like you can't really pull this off as your offensive move for the winter. But now that Bo is in the fold, you could talk me into this all day. I know there is going to be some questions on the defensive fits, and you have to really look into some medical stuff with Lars Nootbaar, as he had a double heel surgery for some condition I never heard of that caused some deformities with the bones with his tendons. And I'm not playing doctor, but you got to look into the medicals and make sure that checks out. And if it does, Nootbaar could hit right-handed pitching pretty well, and Austin Hayes absolutely mashes left-handed pitching. So if you tell me that they're going to have that platoon in left field, and as Steve noted, Carson Bench maybe being the opening day center fielder, there's some defensive risk that you're taking there, especially in an offseason where run prevention was really paramount in David Stearns' discussion. But that would open up the lineup, and I think it'd be, frankly, a pretty dang good one.
All right, one more question here. This is from River Redford. Are the Twins really not going to engage in the trade market? They are projected to be a below 500 team. It would seem they should trade both Buxton and Ryan for young talent. Of course, Joe, both of those players would be fits with the Mets. Buxton more as your center field fit. Joe Ryan in the front of your rotation. But they've been a hard team to figure out for the last year right now, even really going back to the trade deadline, and Buxton being a guy that has a little bit more control because he has a no trade clause.
Twins are weird, man. Like at the trade deadline, they tore the house down except for Joe Ryan and Byron
Their
Buxton.
Best piece.
Yeah. And I think Byron Buxton, they thought about it, but the no trade clause, as you mentioned, was genuinely him just saying, I want to stay in Minnesota. Will his mind change? I would call and see. And I would call Minnesota and say, come on, guys, you're really going to keep Joe Ryan? What's the point in doing this? So I would call and try, and those would be names. But by all accounts, from any type of reporting that you can find, the Twins are not trading Byron Buxton, and they're not trading Joe Ryan. So peculiar to me, but I'm just on a podcast, Connor. I don't run the Minnesota Twins. So
That's right.
I would try, but it feels like the Twins are probably going to be staying pat.
Well, you are a guy on a podcast, which means you can give opinions and predictions, Joe. Before we get out of here today, what do you think is next for the Mets? It feels like they are I'm not convinced they're just going to ignore adding an arm this offseason. Now, Fromber is more of he has to settle on taking less term. And as a 32-year-old free agency, as we talked about with Bellinger before, those are guys looking to just cash out on the bet, maximizing the length of the offer they can get. But there is a trade market out there, even if it's hard to see because trade rumors are kept quiet compared to free agency negotiations. But what do you think is kind of next on David Stearns' list here?
I think starting pitching has to be next. That's
non-negotiable almost.
Yeah. To me, it shouldn't be negotiable. I think a starting pitcher is a must. I would be willing to be opportunistic in the Framber Valdez market. But the one thing that I would say is I would not give Valdez a deal similar to Bichette that has the opt-outs after every year, because now I'm doubling down on giving up draft picks in the 2026 draft, which Mets fans roll their eyes. They don't care, but it means a lot to organizational building, whether you agree or don't agree. So Valdez, that would be a deal that I would say, I'm giving you the 3-year deal, but it's going to be a 3-year deal. You're not opting out after 1 year and then going to reset your market. I don't want the Mets to push the chips into that degree, but I do want to see them look to be opportunistic in the Valdez category. Otherwise, I think the trade market may even have more names, like you said, that we don't know even exist as options to trade for. And Freddie Peralta is just one off the top of the head that makes sense because of the connection. But I think a starting pitcher certainly should be next on the shopping list.
All right, remember to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question. We'll look for it, as you heard today, for a future mailbag. Of course, you can watch every episode we do on SNY's YouTube channel, so become a subscriber over there as well. It feels like the Mets are far from done, but a big addition this morning after not getting Kyle Tucker last night. They land Bo Bichette to play third base for them on a big-time 3-year deal. That's it for us, but we'll catch you guys next week, or if another move is made.